Chaos ensues in New York City amid Trump's arraignment. The Saudis are cutting more oil, which will only exacerbate the already bad inflation problem here in the United States. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand cannot define what a woman is. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know today, Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. But first, you know the drill. Please subscribe to this channel and check out my timeless episodes, which are on another playlist on this YouTube channel. Also, please follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. And finally, we are doing a survey for timeless listeners in order to get a sense of what you like, what you don't like. So I'm going to put a link to that survey in the description down below. Boy, as I'm telling you this, I'm realizing that I'm asking a lot of you. My producers are nodding like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that. Hey, if you do one of those things, I will be very happy and proud of you. On to the first news story of the day, which we covered yesterday and which is all over the news. We won't spend too much time on it, of course, is this Trump debacle. He has been arraigned in New York City. He appeared today at a lower Manhattan courthouse, and apparently Manhattan is just a zoo. There are a lot of people on the streets, both protesters against Donald Trump's arraignment and also those who are supporting the fact that he has been indicted. They are holding up signs and chanting, "Lock him up," which is really funny because that was something that the left hated during the 2016 presidential election campaign. They said that it was so awful that Trump would say such a thing as lock her, i.e. Hillary Clinton, up. And then they are doing it now. And we are seeing that there is a potential chance that our former president will be locked up in a really stunning display of political persecution. I was thinking as I was driving to work today, the term trumped up charges has a whole new meaning now. I explained yesterday what's at stake here, but I'm just going to give you a 1 minute-ish reminder because we have to have our facts straight on this. Just so you know, this is so important to me when I deliver news. I want to do all of the work of the facts so that you don't have to. And I want to arm you with this information so that when you go out and debate your crazy leftist aunt at the dinner table, you have everything straight. We have to know these facts cold because we are at a point in our country where we need to be able to stand up for the truth because things are getting really bad. So let's go over this. It's very, very important. The problem here, or really the basis of the indictment, is that the Trump Organization in 2016 sent $130,000 to Stormy Daniels because Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump had an affair in 2006, 1 year, less than 1 year into President Trump's marriage to Melania. And so, of course, when he ran for president, Stormy Daniels sniffed an opportunity to collect some cash, demanded this hush money. The Trump Organization paid it to her through Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. The Trump Organization cited this money as legal fees, which the indictment alleges is a falsification of business records, and it may be. But a falsification of business records is a misdemeanor under New York law. In order to kick it up to a felony indictment, the DA of Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, had to show that the falsification of business records was intended to conceal another crime. And in a really stunning display of mental and legal gymnastics, they have said that that alleged crime is campaign finance violation. Because, according to the Federal Election Campaign Act, a campaign contribution is any donation made, quote, for the purpose of influencing any campaign for the federal office. So their argument goes that given that this hush money to Stormy Daniels helped Trump's campaign, then it constitutes a campaign contribution under this Federal Election Campaign Act because it influenced a campaign for the federal office. And given that corporations cannot contribute to a campaign for federal office, they are saying that this is illegal, hence the indictment. But as I explained in more detail on my show yesterday, just a reminder, I'm not going to belabor you with too much of the details, the statute holds, this Federal Election Campaign Act holds, that if you have a personal purpose besides a campaign purpose for spending money on a campaign, then that does not count as something that was intended to benefit the campaign. If you travel, for instance, and you are running for president, your hotel expenses would count as a campaign expense because you would have never otherwise stayed at that hotel had you not been running for president. But your meals, for example, do not constitute a campaign expense under this statute because you would have to eat anyway. So here with the Stormy Daniels case, President Trump has made the argument that he paid off Stormy Daniels to stay silent, not just because he was running for president, but more because he wanted to spare his wife and son the embarrassment of the fact that he had an extramarital affair with a porn star, and also he wanted to protect his reputation outside of his candidacy. So again, that's the background of the case. As I have mentioned, a mishmash of Trump supporters and counter-protesters have gathered in front of this lower Manhattan courthouse. As of now, there has not appeared to be any violence, but Trump faces 34 felony counts for this alleged falsification of business records and campaign finance violation. The DA, Alvin Bragg, arrived at the courthouse this morning, and just a few hours ago, President Trump arrived. He looked very solemn, very serious. Walking into the courthouse, we are going to be seeing a mugshot in all likelihood of him, which will undoubtedly be plastered on billboards and T-shirts and used as a talking point for both the left and the right. Two members of Congress were present at this lower Manhattan courthouse, or at least around the area this morning. First, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia and George Santos from New York. Alvin Bragg is set to make some statements at a press conference later today, and former President Donald Trump will fly back to Palm Beach, Florida, and he is due to make remarks tonight at Mar-a-Lago. On to other news, arguably just as important as this Trump indictment. The Saudis have set more output cuts to oil. They have announced this week. Saudi Arabia oil producers said that they would cut more than 1 million barrels of output a day, starting this May. This is adding to an already great cut of oil of 2 million barrels a day that was agreed to in October of 2022 by OPEC. OPEC, of course, is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It's a conglomeration of mostly Middle Eastern, or I think actually almost exclusively Middle Eastern countries, because that is where the vast majority of the oil reserves are. And they work together to set oil prices in a way that benefits all of them. So they already agreed to cut 2 million barrels a day. The Saudis are adding 1 million barrels a day starting this May. And on top of that, just as icing on the cake, OPEC Plus, which is an organization that includes Russia and indeed is led by Russia, has already cut 500,000 barrels a day. So if you take this together, in just 7 months, this is a cut of about 3% of the world's petroleum production. And the Saudis have said that they are probably going to cut more in the coming months in 2023. This really only helps the Saudis and harms the United States, because when they are cutting production, then they can charge higher prices for their oil, and then people like us have to pay more to the regime headed by Mohammed bin Salman. Really, President Biden here is to blame, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, of course, Julie Hartman is conservative, and she's going to blame every single thing on President Trump. That is not true. I am trying to call it as it is, and the way that it is that it is President Biden's fault. He, coming into office and all throughout his campaign, said repeatedly, ad nauseum, quote, no more drilling, especially on federal lands. He has aligned himself with the woke left, the environmentalists, the climate change activists, and he has shut down oil drilling reserves here in the United States. Now, it is important to note that just a few months ago, he did approve an $8 billion oil drilling project in Alaska called the Willow Project, which stunned both the left and the right. But he was really doing that out of an act of desperation, because we have a really big oil problem here in the United States, not to mention an inflation problem, which I am going to get to in a moment. And he meaning President Biden, was in a really desperate situation because he he stopped drilling here in the United States. And that means that he entreated to dictatorial regimes for those regimes to send oil to the United States. Among those regimes were the Venezuelans, which is, I mean, just the fact that we entreated to the Venezuelans is beyond despicable. The leaders of Venezuela inflict egregious human rights violations on their population every day. And of course, President Biden also entreated to Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. He actually did not want to give a handshake to Mohammed bin Salman because, you know, he is a man of principle and he doesn't want to shake this guy's hand because he's this awful dictator. But instead, he did a fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman, which is arguably more friendly than a handshake. And so it just made him look awful. During that same meeting that President Biden did this fist bump, he asked Mohammed bin Salman to increase oil production and export more oil to the United States. Mohammed bin Salman originally agreed to do so, but then, because he could, a few weeks later, he went back on that promise and said that he would not be increasing oil production and he would not be sending it to the United States. That is in part what left President Biden in such a desperate situation and why he approved that $8 billion Willow project. And now the Saudis are just continuing to stick it to us by saying that they are going to cut more oil production. As I mentioned, we really do have a terrible inflation problem here in the United States. The Biden administration has touted the fact that the U.S. inflation rate is at 6.04% right now. That is down from last month's 6.41% and down from last year's high of 8.3%. But bragging about this modest reduction in inflation is akin to the Biden administration saying, well, we broke someone's arm unnecessarily, but it's more healed than it was last month, and it's more healed than it was last year. The arm should not have been broken in the first place. And the reason, to keep going with this analogy, is why the arm was broken is because of stupid policies, i.e. cutting, drilling, and fracking, and making us beholden to dictatorial regimes for our oil. Under President Trump, he made us oil independent. By the way, the United States was oil independent for much of the 1940s, 50s, and even the 1960s. We actually have rich oil reserves here on our continent. We tend to think of the Middle East as sort of having a monopoly over oil, but if you go to the coast of California and do offshore drilling, or if you drill down in Texas, there is a lot of oil there available to us. So we have the full capacity to be oil independent, and we are not. Oil makes such a difference with regard to inflation. Inflation is caused by two things: monetary policy and non-monetary policy. I interviewed, when I guest hosted for Dennis Prager, Steve Forbes, who is a former presidential candidate and head of Forbes magazine, and he explained this. Non-monetary policy is when some exogenous event happens that affects, for instance, oil production. Let's say a hurricane hits the Gulf of the United States and it destroys some of our infrastructure that we use to get oil. That is a non-monetary reason that would cause inflation, because there would be a temporary stalling of getting oil, and then we would need to increase oil prices and get oil from elsewhere. That is non-monetary caused inflation. The reason why we have such a bad inflation problem is because of the other kind, monetary policy. We handed out stimulus checks to a lot of people during COVID. President Biden has said that we should give reparations. San Francisco recently proposed giving as much as $5 million to African-American families. President Biden has tried, at the very least, in some cases succeeded at forgiving student loans, and he has shut down a lot of the oil reserves. So this is why inflation is so bad. And what's really stunning is that starting in the 1980s, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which determines inflation, actually took away food and fuel in their calculation of inflation. So right now, as I said, our inflation rate is 6.04%. It is probably close to double that in actuality, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics takes away food and fuel, which is so idiotic, because that is A, the causes of inflation, and B, that is how most people experience inflation. Right now, apartment building sales have dropped the most that they have been in 14 years. Americans are defaulting on their car payments at the highest rate since 2009, and discretionary spending, i.e. non-essential spending, among Americans is down, and it is only going to get worse as OPEC and the Saudis and the Russians are cutting oil production. In a stunning display of stupidity, the White House National Security Council made a statement in the wake of this announcement that the Saudis are cutting oil production. They said, quote, "We are focused on prices for American consumers, not barrels, and prices have come down significantly since last year, more than $1.50 per gallon from their peak last summer." That first part really should go down in the history of the all-time stupid statements made by the Biden White House. We're focused on prices for American consumers, not barrels. What do you think informs the prices? Barrels. Duh. I mean, the incompetence of the people we have in office, I shouldn't be laughing because so many Americans are suffering, but it really is just unbelievable. And outside of the economic implications of this announcement, it shows yet again that the Saudis are exerting increasing power over us. They know that they can do this, and trust me, they're doing it to piss President Biden off. And to boot, they are getting closer with our adversaries, namely Syria, Iran, Russia, and China. On to the third and final news story of the day, and another really just awful news story for Western civilization. Chris Hipkins, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, he's actually newly elected as Prime Minister of New Zealand, as Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister, stepped down, saying that she felt that she no longer had the energy to do the job well. She was my commencement speaker when I graduated from Harvard just about 10 months ago. Chris Hipkins, this new prime minister, was recently asked in a press conference to define a woman. He was given 2 opportunities to define a woman, and let's hear how he responded.
How do you and how does this government define a woman?
To be honest, Sean, that question's come slightly out of left field for me. Well, biology, sex, gender. People define themselves. People define their own genders.
Keir Starmer has said that he believes 99.9% of women do not have penises. And I know it's a strange thing for him to say, but given recent events in New Zealand, I'd ask again, how do you define what a woman is?
Well, I think as I've just indicated, I wasn't expecting that question, so it's not something that I've, pre-formulated an answer on. But in terms of gender identity, I think people define their gender identity for themselves.
That is pretty amazing. I was not expecting this question, so I haven't pre-formulated an answer. Ay. New Zealand is incredibly woke, sadly, and the United States obviously is becoming incredibly woke, but really New Zealand is one of the leaders in Western civilization of a woke country. The Supreme Court of New Zealand last year held that confining the voting age to those who are 18 and older is, ready for this, discriminatory towards young people. So that is they're trying to pave the way to lower the voting age in New Zealand. The fact that the Supreme Court held that is really astonishing. And you know what? Don't think that this isn't coming to the United States, because it is. I'd like to remind you of a clip of our very own Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, of course, President Biden's nominee to the court, when she was asked in her confirmation hearings the same question. Let's hear what she said.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning-
You know, we play these clips and we laugh at them and talk about how crazy it is, but I think that we all just need to pause and take a step back and truly try to internalize how nuts this is. I was speaking with a friend recently who works at a very prominent financial firm. I will not repeat the name, but trust me, you know the name. And she was telling me, because she's on one of the hiring interview committees for this firm, and she was saying that there's a policy now at her company that they do not ask minority applicants technical financial questions because that is seen as racist. And so I was talking with her, and I was kind of in a group of people, and the people in that group laughed. And of course, I was just laughing at those two clips, but really we shouldn't be laughing because it is just it's so damaging. All of this is so incredibly damaging. What Chris Hipkins and Ketanji Brown Jackson are displaying is utter and complete cowardice. And don't think that this is not the reason why we have transgender surgeries, this transgender epidemic in our country, where Boston Children's Hospital, as recently as yesterday, said that they're giving more money and resources to doctors and nurses to permanently change people's bodies in so-called gender-affirming care. We look at that and we just think it's an instance of absurdity, but it really does pave the road for the very harmful policies that we're seeing today, and it's going to pave the road for further harmful policies. If the New Zealand Prime Minister is saying that a woman is whatever a woman is, or someone can identify as a woman if they want to, let's say we have a criminal, and a criminal is convicted of a crime. The criminal goes, well, I don't identify as a criminal. You think I'm a criminal, but I don't think I'm a criminal. Then maybe they could be let out of jail. That is the road that we're going down. So if everything is just subjective and you can identify however you want, don't think this isn't coming next. I know that this is a lot of sort of bad news to throw at you. I want to give you more good news during these shows, but what I will end with is that as bad as things are, we have this Trump indictment, the Saudis are cutting oil production, and the New Zealand Prime Minister and our Supreme Court Justice and other leaders of Western civilization cannot define a woman. Despite all this bad news, a lot of people are waking up. There are large contingents in this country and in the world who are seeing this for what it really is and standing up against it. And I hope to be a leader in that movement. Thank you very much for watching. As a reminder, all of those action items, please subscribe, check out my show Timeless, follow me at Julie R. Hartman, and please do fill out that survey. I would really love to hear your thoughts. Take care and see you soon.